This is a work session. So the purpose of tonight's work session is to give the Planning Commission the opportunity to hear information and ask questions related to the upcoming Planning Code Chapter 16 amendments. This information is preliminary in nature and often complex and detailed in content. Professional or contract staff is sometimes scheduled for presentations. To make the most of the short time we are given for these meetings and to keep professional or contract staff costs to a minimum, the Planning Commission has a policy that public or audience comment will not be taken at work session meetings. This is appropriate under Oregon Public Meetings Law. Instead, we invite public comment at all of the Planning Commission regular meetings under either of the two opportunities dedicated on each agenda for public comment. In addition, we invite the public to contact city staff with comments or concerns. Although this is a public meeting, the Planning Commission cannot make any formal decisions in a work session. Next steps, actions are often determined for deliberation and discussion at future Planning Commission regular meetings. So who of our triumvirate over there is going to lead us?
Kick us off.
I'll start.
Okay.
Sandy Floyd, Planning Department, City of Canby. Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
Start over.
There it is.
Would it be appropriate for us to go around and
Sure.
introduce? Brian, why don't you start?
I'm Brian Brown, Planning Director.
I am Lainey Faust, Recording Secretary.
Sandy Floyd, Planning Department.
Michael Hutchinson, Commissioner.
Jason Taylor, Commissioner.
Larry Boatwright, Commissioner.
John Savory, Commissioner.
Jennifer Trundy, Commissioner.
Derek Modern, Commissioner. Jeff Mills, Commissioner.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have a couple of issues to discuss tonight. The wireless, small cell technology, building height, and appeal timeframes per ORS. We gave you several handouts. Don't expect you to read them all tonight. It's just a beginning of a discussion that we're going to have regarding 5G small cell deployment with the city. There's going to be a joint Planning Commission City Council work session March 18th to review the same materials. And the paperwork that you have has some links in there, and there's tons of information out there on this. And so we have a little YouTube video as a background. Of course, feel free to research everything you want. And I'm just going to lead a little bit of the discussion as to why we're having this discussion in the first place and go from there. And I see Commissioner Trundy is already thinking ahead here. So I akin this to, we're living in the age of the Jetsons now, and I probably aged myself a little bit. It's coming fast. And so the first handout is kind of just a visual of where we started with all of this wireless technology, and it started with the 1G. The G is generation. The 1G was your analog brick Motorola phone, and it had an analog signal, poor voice quality, and it was easily altered by external interference. And the data speeds were very slow and poor security. And then we graduated to 2G, flip phones, SIM cards. Then 3G, which was higher transfer speeds and data. And we went from flip phones to smartphones in the 3G world. And then most of us now have 4G, and it's got a tremendous amount of speed. It's been increased from 3G to 4G. LTE, and I didn't know what that stood for, so I looked it up, and it stands for long-term evolution. And this has given us the ability to have really high-resolution screens, watch videos on our phones, movies, everything that we do now with our smartphones. And everybody's competing for cell strength. It's a capacity issue and downloading speeds. So now I was telling Ryan, my coworker, that I think that we're going into a paradigm shift here with this new 5G technology, and it's not just about the cell phones. It's about opening up the possibilities of the potential for the innovation across the world not only for our phones, but enabling smart cities, smart homes. That really cool refrigerator at Best Buy that you can order your groceries by tapping it, that's based on IoT, Internet of Things. And the technology is driving all of this, robotics, remote surgeries, medical, nanotechnology. They can put these little chips in bridges, and it'll start sending a signal when there's a failure approaching or it needs repairing. And it's way into the future, infrastructure-wise. The 5G is 10 to 100 times faster than 4G. And autonomous vehicles, another one. The thing with 5G that's very different is that it's got a shorter wavelength than the tall monopoles that travels a long distance, the radio waves, the frequency. So the shorter wavelengths are going to require more smaller cells, and they're smaller because they need to be set in various strategic locations, because the 5G downside is that the signal is easily disrupted by buildings, potentially the weather. So there's this small cell deployment that is going to take place in a lot of city right-of-ways on light poles and the like within the right-of-way. And the reason why we're having to discuss this right now is that in 2018, in September, the FCC had a ruling that pretty much preempts any local jurisdiction from really getting in the way of deployment. However, there was a lot of appeals and lawsuits and whatnot flying around on that. And so we have a say in placement in the right-of-way, design, aesthetics, noise. There's been some cities that have undergrounding requirements. They typically want to place these facilities on light poles or telephone poles. We have our Canby Utility that doesn't want them on their light poles, so it's going to be interesting. This is just the beginning of this. And I've attached in your handouts, there's samples of photos from Wilsonville that recently updated their code. Yes?
I hate to interrupt, but I do have a question.
Sure.
So if we're going to have more towers, and this is kind of a general question, I ask because I don't know. So when you're going to require more towers, is that correct?
They're small cells. They're not on towers. They're more
Okay.
placed on light poles.
Okay, so really like rurally, or if you're going between, say, Salem and Sisters, it's difficult even now to get. So how does that?
That's the challenge.
Okay.
It's a huge investment in infrastructure by all the service providers, the wireless companies that are going to have to put this infrastructure in place. And it's just the beginnings of it. This is going to take years to happen. But because of the FCC ruling, they have something called the shot clock. And it has to do with a city's jurisdiction, any local jurisdiction, timeframes that we take per law to review these wireless facilities, these towers, these monopoles that come through. And so the shot clock is typically 90 days to 120 days when it's deemed complete, that it has to go through the approval process. For the small cell wireless, that has now gotten shorter for us. As soon as an application is submitted, if it's a co-location placed on an existing wireless facility, let's say, we have to process it in and out and done in 60 days. Or we're in trouble with the FCC, or it's an automatic approval. We lose any ability to chime in and get any type of regulations we want on it. If it's a new freestanding small cell site, we have 90 days. And we're also prohibited from charging excessive fees for them to put them on the light poles in the city. And so it gets into more complicated issues of franchise fees with cities and how much we can charge per year to get to allow these carriers on our poles or Canby Utilities poles within the public right-of-way or on any other type of street furniture, let's say. What else? So that's just kind of an overview. There is in the second handout, there's some guidelines from the FCC related to the exposure of radio frequency electromagnetic fields, EF. And you can click on the link or just copy the link, or I'll email it to you so you can click on it. And there's a handout, a guide that we have to follow as a jurisdiction as to what is categorically exempt, where we can't say no or deny a permit because of the EF. If they meet a certain frequency, we can't touch it. And so there's checklists in there. And so I'll have Lainey email this out to you tomorrow so you can just click on the link if you don't want to have to type it in. And that's just the background on that. The other material is just background, and we've been gathering information from Salem, McMinnville, Wilsonville, Oregon City that have been crafting code language to address this, so that if we have a bite at the apple, we can at least address it aesthetically and design-wise. And a lot of the cities have been getting hit up by some of these carriers with tons and tons of applications. San Francisco, when it first came out, one application, I'm sorry, one of the times they submitted 600 applications to the city, and they had nothing in place to deal with this. So it was going to be automatically approved. And sometimes the cabinets they put on these things, I've heard horror stories that they're the size of a small refrigerator, let's say. Sitting up high, somebody's bedroom, apartment window is facing this thing and it's making noise. And they couldn't regulate it because they didn't have anything in place. So we want to get out ahead of this by amending the code to deal with small cell deployment.
I have a question. Are you going to create some type of a short form application process?
We're going to have probably a type 1 land use application that's pretty much a ministerial, straight administrative review. We'll have a checklist that will comply with whatever code language we put into place so we can get them in and out accordingly, but hopefully to our guidelines as much as we can, that the FCC allows us to do that.
Are you going to have a format where if they submit 600 of them or 200 of them at a time, that's such a lot of process to go through that there's like something that's duplicative that makes it easier for you to process instead of having to go through every single
That's
form?
what we're hoping to do, and so we have to look at other cities to see what kind of forms they've come up with. We're still in real fast, heavy research here, but our city attorney has been getting a lot of pressure from some companies, and he's staving them off for now. But so we've got to act.
And when you say they make noise, how loud are they?
I don't know.
I mean, do they sound like this thing? Or is it?
I've not been next to one. I've heard stories, and I'm sure we can all research it.
Mike probably knows.
He might know.
Well, there's going to be electrical noise, and there's probably going to be a transformer inside it, changing it to whatever electricity the transmitter itself needs. And so, just the basic electrical noise of any, solid-state device.
And
it's huge.
But you have quite a few of them at the same time making this noise?
Yeah, well, I would imagine it'd be a proximity issue.
Yeah, they have to be a certain distance from each other, and some cities are, let's say, requiring them be put on a pedestal, let's say 24 inches in diameter, so all the equipment is in there. And some are requiring that equipment then go underground to underground vaults. So there's a lot of that going on as well. And for a city that likes the underground infrastructure.
Do you know what the reason is for the underground vaulting?
The visual aesthetics and the noise.
Aesthetic.
Yeah.
Because, I've been in previous cell tower applications where we required them to go underground.
Right.
Because of noise.
Right.
And that was an AT&T application. And they agreed to do that. I mean,
Do we have
required
any
that.
antennas?
So
on this?
to me, noise is one of the bigger ones here in addition to aesthetics. But if one is in your neighborhood or you've got a network of them and they're all buzzing away,
And
you're not going to be happy.
People aren't. And then the other thing
Yeah.
is, we can assume that within the next, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 5 years, who knows, that maybe technology would change to where we wouldn't need to have one every 2 city
That's right.
blocks or whatever.
This is
Pretty soon.
rapidly, like all technology, it happened yesterday.
So it's
already.
changing so quickly that it's like, oh great, now we're gonna accept all of this stuff, and then the technology would change to such a degree that then they would only have every 2 months.
But if we have a noise standard for an installation, wherever it is.
And that's what we also have to research that to see if the FCC has noise exemptions. That's part of our research that we have to do as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I did look on the National League of Cities, and that's in your handout, and it's kind of a best practices guide for municipalities to follow, an action guide. So like I said, we're doing a lot of research, and we're hoping to come back with a text amendment at some point here after we visit with the city council.
It seems like there's a little bit of a balance. I mean, I think the people are going to want it. I mean, it's something that I think a lot of our citizens are going to
Well,
want.
look in your own home.
You know, and it's on the one hand. So on the other hand, you know, you want to protect them. But, you know, like, for example, just saying they got to bury everything for aesthetics when I don't even know what it looks like yet is kind of just saying, I don't want it.
And we don't know that we can
And I
require
don't
them
think
to
that's what
bury
we
it.
want to say yet, you know.
Well, these are just options apparently that other cities have been dealt with.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's part of our research.
So that's where we kind of got to go, why are they doing that? Just like you asked.
Yeah.
Like, why are they burying it? Well, obviously somebody somewhere said, hey, this looks terrible.
Well, I know why they bury for cell towers, and that's usually for noise. And aesthetic, but usually for noise, because
Right.
So to avoid the task of somebody coming in and putting in 600 applications to our small department as opposed to a larger planning department, are we allowed to limit the number of applications that can be submitted at one time? Not really for the purpose of slowing things down, but to give us the time to process them.
I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, we'll have to look it up. My gut wants to tell me no, we can't. But that's a question for our city attorney as well and part of our research. I had the pleasure of speaking to the planner, his name is Omar, in San Francisco a couple years ago when this was all starting to unfold. And I didn't ask him that question though, but I had some pretty good visuals of what they were dealing with there that I had seen.
One of the things to keep in mind too is in any of these deployments, one is the technology is not the same for each of the wireless providers. Yeah. So it's not just one tower, it's not just 200 apps, it's times whatever provider wants to be in here. They're not sharing these antennas from a small cell deployment. And it also is very frequency based between the providers that are out there and getting different frequencies. So
Derek, are you thinking that you could end up with Siamese
10
boxes
per block or something?
you
for
can
4 different companies' boxes?
Antennas going on because it will use different frequencies to do that.
Like, what are we willing to put up with, for this kind of technology?
And so beyond that, the other thing to keep in mind that each one of these requires a wireline connection. So they have to get back to the world somehow, and they're not doing it. There are some applications where a really close hop can be done wirelessly, but they don't want to chew up that bandwidth, so they're going to be dropping fiber to these locations.
And it's an interesting bandwidth because I had heard that the bandwidth that they wanted to get into, and I don't remember the number, was one frequency, I guess, below the National Weather Service, NOAA. And it was so close that there was fear by NOAA that it was going to interfere with what they put out to predict hurricanes and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it's so close that it could get in the way. And so that was a very interesting thing that I was listening to. I can't remember.
And that's behind the reason why why it's going to take so long to come out is simply because of the infrastructure that has to be placed to be able to connect all this to the world. It doesn't. Just because they put it up doesn't mean that it gets there. And then, of course, they have to have power.
Now, you're in this industry, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So, in your opinion then, what do you think that the technology would do? I mean, that's a hard thing to predict, but like in the next, say, 4 or 5 years, is this something that could wildly expand? I mean, or is it just a who knows?
I wouldn't pretend to try to predict technology from a history perspective. Wireless moves a lot faster than most industries, and that's simply because it's a fast-paced changing technology. But the real thing that you're talking about is, what happens if they need these towers now and then they don't need them because they can go. It's based on frequency. So there's a certain physics to this, and the reason why you're having to go small cell deployment is because of the frequency, and we don't have a lot of frequency, and that's a very limited amount. And so what you're seeing by the FCC right now is taking TV frequency and space and allocating it for the wireless providers. And so as they get into these higher frequencies, it can handle more bandwidth, but you have to have that small cell deployment because it can't propagate as far.
Well, I asked this question a little bit before too, but then where in all of this, do we start concerning ourselves with if we had, say, 20 different companies with 20 different of these antennas?
Aesthetics will certainly, I don't
I mean,
know
that's
about
aesthetics,
I
but
don't
I'm
know about the
talking more about
noise. The noise, to me, it all depends on what they're doing and how they're deploying it.
But I'm talking more about the RF signals. I mean, if you have that many things putting off this much signal, at what point are we
Within the
inundated?
FCC regulated testing, so.
Yeah, so
It's all certified before it goes out. I can't tell you if the government is doing its job there,
okay.
but it is, yes, they cannot deploy anything that's not been approved.
Yeah, each individual company, but I'm saying, is there somebody somewhere that's actually compiling the RF signal data to be able to say, well, now we've reached a limit now, or we have too many of these towers now. and it's putting
I
off-
isn't interested in that.
Sorry?
The head of the FCC isn't interested in that.
Well, it's a
He's
great
he's
question.
100% pro-business right now.
Well, we're certainly interested in it too, though, as people.
Well, we're obviously having it force-fed to us, so it's like, we're in a position to react and not really demand
Just
much.
let it happen, I guess?
Well, you say it's not that different, I mean, if you look at the cell tower, I mean, cell tower have always had, deployers have always had very significant rights in coming into municipalities and getting approved with conditions usually, but they can't be put off. So this isn't, to me, that different. As Sandy points out, if the time frame gets real tight and the numbers go real high, and I think what we can really do is somewhat limited. I mean, we can, where it involves safety and property values, we have some ability. But, if we can't say, well, we're going to ignore that FCC allowable thing, we're not going to be able to do that, I don't think. So, there's only going to be a certain range of things that we're going to be able to deal with.
Yeah, as a planning commission, yeah.
I'm just thinking that for the best use of our time this evening, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and let Sandy continue, but also maybe come up with some of the brief questions we want to address before a future meeting so that we can, get the overview tonight. If we have some specific brief questions that we can have her look into, or the whole team look into before we meet on it again, I think that would probably be the most proper use of our time.
Yeah, that's good, and Ryan's taking some notes too, and Lainey's taking notes, and the questions are good because they'll probably come up at the joint work session as well, and so we can maybe put out what the questions were already from tonight so that the counselors get a look at that as well.
Can we limit it to one carrier per light pole?
I don't know, they have, probably not, they have co-location allowances, and that's the shot clock is 60 days on a co-locate. So if you're a business and you want to locate on something, is it going to be less money for you to do it and share the cost, or put out all the money by yourself, right, and put up a site? I don't
The
know.
odd thing is a lot of the older cell technology they can deal with as private citizens. They would get space that they would buy or lease from a private person, and they would get access. And I mean, this is a lot more of a civic issue.
Yeah.
Well, and this, from things that I've seen on it, it's not something that it's like, okay, every time they want to put one in, and correct me if I'm wrong, they have to put up a light pole. They can put them on corners of buildings, and they can put them on roofs, and there's
Other structures that
options
can't
and
be
other
put on.
structures.
And those are co-locations.
Right, and that's what I would say is that aesthetically, to limit the intrusion to the visibility of them, as far as that aesthetic of having, giant backpacks on multiple poles when they could have put them all in one place and maybe semi-concealed with a sculpture or something. That type of thing. And then I would say the other thing that I would like to see addressed in the code, if possible, is a requirement for removal when it becomes old technology, because that's the last thing we need is a bunch of, space junk on the street.
Dead poles, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I worked in a jurisdiction where we did require that, but I'm not there anymore, so I'm not there seeing if it's coming down
Yeah,
or
no,
not.
I think that's important.
That's a good one, though.
I think that, that should happen across the board, even with signs and everything else that people put up, that you see an ugly
Yeah.
sign that's on a street corner, yeah.
We actually have that already in the code, but
It's electrical code as well. You have to
Yeah.
pull the power once
they
it's
can pull the power, but there's a gas station down here. It used to be a Shell station, now it's a Power V or something like that. That Shell station was out and gone for years. But yet there's something in our code that says they have 90 days to get rid of it now. They didn't.
And I would say that's something that if we're looking at changing things in the code, that we should maybe tighten that language up, because it looks like we're going to have more and more of this type of thing. And, you know, I think that they should be responsible for their stuff.
That's a good point. For time's sake, because we have two other little items, should we watch the little video? It's short, and then come back to more questions, and then reserve the last 15 to 20 minutes to the last two short items that we just have to have a discussion about?
Sure.
Does that work? Okay. And thank you, Ryan, for finding this great video. One of many.
5G is the 5th generation of wireless data networks, and it will improve them far more than 4G or 3G ever could. You'll feel it in your phone, your home, your car, and in the city and town around you. Downloads and streaming should happen literally without delay. Cars will talk to each other to prevent collisions. And untethered augmented and virtual reality can finally be achieved with real-time response. Not to mention industrial benefits like remote surgery or drone control. 5G does its magic with 3 key abilities. First, high bandwidth. 4G could only muster about 200 megabits per second of data throughput on a good day. 5G can handle up to 1 gigabit or more. That's 1,000 megabits a second on up. Low latency. 4G suffers from around 100 milliseconds or so in response delay or latency. 5G reaction time can be as low as 1 millisecond, which makes everything happen virtually instantly. And dense connections. In a given square kilometer, 4G could only manage to connect about 1/10 the amount of devices as 5G can. If that's some of what 5G does, how does it do it? 5G uses new radio technology, the part of any wireless device that makes the connection. 5G uses some radio frequencies in a band known as sub-6, from 600 megahertz to 6 gigahertz, part of which is also used by current 4G LTE. But 5G will also use a higher band of radio frequencies, from 24 gigahertz to as high as 86. These much higher frequencies bring with them much higher data rates. Now, while these new 5G radio waves can carry more data with higher performance, they can't carry it as far. So 5G will use a lot of so-called small cells. These are small versions of the big cellular towers we all know. 5G will also use some new tricks in these small cells, like beamforming, to efficiently aim transmissions rather than just spray everything everywhere. The bottom line, though, you will need new phones, tablets, portable hotspots, and the like with a 5G radio inside to connect to the new 5G networks. Your current 4G or even 3G gear can't tap into it. 5G networks will also position more data and computing resources closer to you that will avoid blunting 5G's low latency benefits. Most of us do think of phones when we think of wireless networks, but phones may actually be the least interesting thing about 5G. It will also power autonomous cars, so they have awareness of every other car, bike, pedestrian, and traffic signal around them. Smart cities based on 5G can make almost anything that's electric also connected and aware. When a bridge needs repair, why can't it tell someone? With a mesh of 5G connected sensors, it could. And then there's your home. 5G will offer a new way to get internet there, eschewing cable or DSL, and one day maybe even obviating your Wi-Fi router altogether, as devices may just use 5G natively to connect directly to a wireless ISP. 5G has renewed concerns about the safety of cellular radio waves. Some cities have taken action to block 5G deployment. Health questions come up around 5G's use of microwave frequencies, lots of them as we've seen, thanks to that large number of small cells that will be installed around us. Now, while 5G may sound like a lot of microwave ovens mounted on poles running with their doors open, in fact, microwaves are nothing new, already emitted by your current smartphone, old cordless phones, your wireless headphones and earbuds, and just about anything with Wi-Fi, as well as, yes, microwave ovens. But even 5G's highest frequencies are considered by scientists to be non-ionizing radiation. You have to move on up to X-rays, gamma rays, and cosmic radiation to find the kind of emissions that will harm cells, and 5G is far below that. 5G follows the inverse square law, losing power rapidly at even a small distance from the small cell. The US CDC says there is no scientific evidence to provide a definite answer to the question of cellular radio wave safety, whether it's 3G, 4G, or 5G. 5G will take years to roll out and some investment on your part, but the complexity of that deployment and debugging should be worth the wait, delivering the world we've been promised for a long time, where everything is connected, aware, and responsive, and a world in which we can stop worrying about the availability or performance of connectivity in the first place.
It's a little nerve-wracking for me.
Yeah.
I know.
Sorry, I'll be the bad guy.
Reminds
Oh,
me-
yeah, you know.
Reminds me of a movie, and I can't think of which one.
It's scary, they'll know everything.
So let me jump in here and tell you just a couple things that we've experienced in the past 2 years related to this topic. The main issue is we've had probably 5 companies approach us in the last 2 years. And we've basically pushed them all off because we don't have anything that handles, because what they want to do is go in our public right-of-way. They have a choice to go on private property, but that isn't what they're after, and most of it's because of this whatever ruling the FCC made that gave them special permission, basically, to utilize cities' public right-of-ways. And why pay each individual private property owner, go into a contract agreement, et cetera, and have to pay them exorbitant fees that aren't controlled by the FCC in any way on private property? So they're massively trying to go into our public right-of-ways, and the powers that be nationwide are fighting constantly to remove all of the cities, the local government's rights to control their right-of-way. They're trying to take those rights away from us constantly. We've been fighting that for many years, and so far it's been a losing battle. We keep getting various things taken away from us. That public right-of-way serves so many things for the public benefit, and one of them is providing all sorts of utilities and service agencies that are providing communication services and all of the other uses that you always think of for vehicles and pedestrians and the street trees and everything else that we have our public right-of-ways for. But these trying to deal with these companies is that they start in the big metropolises, and it's because they have the largest market there. And they're focusing on not the whole cities, they're focusing on particular intensive areas that there's lots of cars that are communicating, or there's a high density of people and all this kind of thing. And they're focusing on those particular areas, so that's where the revenue is. And that's going to help drive being able to afford the technology. And I know about zero about all this. And Commissioner Modern was very, very true that there's so much physics and science behind all this, and what they said in the video, the wavelength. And that idea that you can stand next and look into your microwave oven because the wavelengths don't go far at all. Well, that's the problem with this technology. There's 2 major problems. It doesn't travel very far. We saw another video today before we picked this one for you to, and the guy was in, I forget what town he was in, but he was
in Providence, Rhode Island.
Yeah, he had 4-story, beautiful building, and then right outside of it in the public right-of-way is this big telephone pole, and on the top of it you have the 4 little antennas. And he was testing his brand new $1,900 Samsung 5G.
1,000 something Samsung
Yeah,
Galaxy.
and he had a tester on it that said how fast the speed for
Speed test.
downloads and everything. And he said, this thing's 100 times faster than the 4G phone he had, while he was within a straight of line sight of the antenna. He walked a few feet away and went around the corner of the 4-story building. Oh, now it's only doing barely 4G speed. And so you got to be in this direct line of sight. He went behind a tree. It slowed it down quite a bit. Not as much as the building did, but, and so that means what we've already said. They're going to be everywhere where they know they've got a lot of customers that are using it. And that customers is going to be the Internet of Things, whether you got houses that are adopting and putting stuff in their house that's communicating, whether you've got public entities that are putting smart devices on every light pole themselves so they can tell us when they burnt out and we don't have to go out and check or have a neighbor call in and say, my light's out. It will tell you and report back to you. And that is a smart community. There's huge organizations that are working on all of this, and they're finding out that they can save a tremendous amount of efficiencies because these little things that talk to each other are way cheaper once you get them installed than hiring people to do these kind of things. And so that's what is likely going to make it spread quickly. I read an article, and I believe it, but it said that one of the hidden truths about 5G that hasn't really come out on a regular basis for anybody is that they're enormous consumers of electricity. And so, like we're getting 100 times faster speed and everything, well, there's a cost to it. They're going to take 5 times the energy use that 4G does. And that doesn't bode well for climate change in how many electric plants we're going to have to support this communication, that type of thing. So anyhow, our thought was, since the FCC said that it's going to be just a free-for-all once they start believing there's truly a market here and start barraging us, and already they must think there's a market since we've had 5 entities contact us. They want to know what our process is, how much do you charge, how long will it take, and where can we put them. And so the where that we can put them is pretty unique for Canby compared to some communities, because we have our own electric company, Canby Utility, that controls all of the telephone poles that are in town. And because their electric wires are strung on those. And they've said to date that they won't allow co-location of any of these wireless facilities on their poles because it poses a potential safety hazard if they should ever have to work on their own equipment or line that's on that pole, if it's also got these other things in there that could be a problem. And I don't know whether that will hold up over time, that position that they're taking. But that automatically means all of our existing telephone poles, which is the #1 place they locate, are off limits in Canby. The other thing that's important is that, as far as I know, we have a right to support our current council policy that we are an underground community. And we won't allow the erection of new telephone poles in Canby. So all the new subdivisions have gone in, everything is underground, new service. Now, they'll still leave the service coming up to the adjacent property, and then the wire goes down in the ground to serve the new neighborhood. They aren't taking down existing wires that aren't in the new property developing. but they are undergrounding everything to serve what's new. So the second thing they've always asked is, well, then can we erect our own telephone poles? And we've said no, because we're an underground community. If we won't let our electric utility continue, you probably have heard that it's at least 7 times more expensive to underground lines than to leave them overhead on the telephone poles. So that's why we've had to pretty much adopt regulations or policies that say you must go underground, because otherwise everybody would continue to be overhead, because it's a whole lot cheaper.
Are there different guidelines then, obviously for the power companies versus the communications companies? Is that what we're dealing with here?
Well, at the current point, I think they have the right to say that they can't use our poles. I don't know if that'll continue over time or not. There may be enough communities that thwart the implementation of this communication technology that the FCC does another ruling and prohibits utility companies from prohibiting co-location.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, there's a discussion too from some of the companies that I've heard about. They go to the PUC, the Public Utility Commission, to state that they are actually a utility, and there's discussions as to whether that is true or not. I think that's still to be determined. It's an interesting category we're in.
If there is an existing power pole and they can't go on it, do they have to underground it, or can they say, since there's existing poles in that area, we should be allowed to put up another pole?
Well, I don't know this technology that well, but it's my understanding that they have to put something up in the air, the antennas.
Right.
But they also have to have a connection to electricity and power generation. And my understanding is, I think most of them are connecting probably underground to an existing system like direct link.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing. And so I don't know what that arrangement is with the other companies, that they're using their infrastructure in some way to complete their connection. And so I just found that out recently. I had no idea they were jumping on the existing lines of other companies that are already interlinked within the community, and they have to do that, apparently.
So I should probably know this, but I don't. Are our streetlights in town owned by the city or by Canby Utility?
No, we actually own the streetlights after they go in. Canby Utility has the basic standards of how the spacing should be and such to light a neighborhood properly. But once they're erected, then the city takes over the maintenance and they become our poles.
Because I saw one of these had pictures of them on the streetlights. So does that mean that if Canby Utility says, no, you can't go on our power pole, that they can go to the city and say, hey, we want to be on your streetlight?
That's right. And that's where we've ended up at, is saying that, yes, you can potentially use our light poles. At least that's what we believe is the position right now. And some of them might want to erect new and additional light poles. And one of the reasons might be that the current ones might be too short, or they might not be strong enough structurally to hold the amount of equipment or something they might need or want to put on them.
So is that something we could put in the code, that if they're replacing, this light pole on the road, they have to be congruent with the rest of the light poles on the road?
That's what we can get into the
Possibly.
design.
That's what I'm saying, is that we can't, replace every fifth one with something that doesn't look like the rest.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we get to say as a city.
So,
And
but
of course-
they have to pay for all of the replacement.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, there could be downsides in the fact that they may need certain heights or desire certain heights, but maybe they're going to have more if they have to have shorter existing poles. Then that means they have to have more. One of the companies that went the furthest with us said that Well, we only need 3 to serve all of Canby. Well, that's under the current customer load that they might be able to mine and get revenue from maybe at this time. But I think our new city administrator said someone approached them in his previous town in Monmouth, much smaller town, and they proposed 26 to serve that town. So that was just what they wanted to do to get in the door.
Foot in their door, yeah.
Yeah, is what I believe.
They can disguise them as gargoyles and put them on the corners of the Dahlia, right?
Exactly.
They could.
It'll add more character.
Right?
Well, no, that's the other point, though, is that you were talking about the obstructions, right? So it limits the efficiency of the signal, and severely, it sounds like. And I don't know if there's any particular way in terms of technology that the phone would then default to like 4G technology if the 5G goes away, or does the phone just go out? And
I
you like
suppose a new phone would have to be backwards compatible to have that.
Yeah,
because these
you would
phones would
think.
have to have a certain radio frequency in them to work in a 5G world.
Well, that's, I guess, what I had.
I think we can expect this technology to stay in urban areas. I mean, once you get out of town very far, you're going to want longer frequencies, which, you know, you can't move as much data if you're driving, so.
Well, and then assumably then 4G would be enough.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen mine default down to 2.
That's what I mean, yeah, it defaults back. But with that in mind, that would mean that they might see a benefit to putting fewer of these 100 foot high, see? So we have to have some sort of a height limit, I'm assuming.
But yeah, that's the other thing we would look at. I've seen other jurisdictions have height limits on poles in the right of way. Some are
Right.
80 feet, some are 35. It depends on what it's going on, whether it's an existing light pole.
The issue is, again, though, that they say that the small cell is what they're calling them, the 5G only travels hundreds of feet, not multiple thousands that the large cell towers that we see do.
Right.
And so, you know, even if they are up higher, that's almost problematic because then it's going to be almost 100 feet down to the
Further
ground.
away, yeah, exactly.
And so there's half of our distance just to get back down to the ground.
We could become a forest of trees and have them make
Right.
little mini monopoles down the road, right?
I was
Get some
gonna
more
say,
pine
in the
trees.
sake of time, do you think, and I don't know,
No,
Lainey or Brian, can we accept the planning commissioner's questions post this meeting up until the time of the next work
Oh, I imagine
session?
so. I mean, I think this discussion has been really valuable
Oh, it's
already
fascinating.
with you guys
Really
giving
is.
us a few things that we can check on. But the focus really is, they walk in, and the first step is for them to get in Canby. It's not true in some other cities. We're going to make them get a franchise agreement. And by getting a franchise agreement, we're going to have to try, best of our knowledge at this time, treat everyone the same. Well, apparently, they've indicated that the FCC has already dictated that we can't charge any more than
5%.
5% or something, and so we're already charging 7 or something for other franchisees.
So it has to be equal.
So there may be this equalization that has to happen, and we are forced to allow them. And if we're going to keep the franchise for them, then there's going to be an equalization process that happens. And that's kind of the fee that apparently would be an annual right of using the public right-of-way fee. Every year you have to pay this, I think. You
That's
probably
right.
know that. And so the fees that we're focusing on is mainly a permit to get each site or your grouping of sites that you come in for. And that's what we'll have to figure out is if FCC allows us to charge up to $100 per site and they bring in 30 at once, well, we'd probably charge somewhere in there. And what Joe has told me, our city attorney, is that the way it's set up is that you can't try to make money off of them. You can only recover costs. And so if we have to review their application and go through a process of seeing if it complies with certain design standards we create, then we can try to create a cost that we think will recover our costs.
So maybe we
And
do
it
want
can't be
long
over $100 per site.
Maybe we do want long applications.
It does say per the FCC ruling that we're limited to $100 per site.
Reoccurring fees of
And recurring
$270.
fees of $270. It's a safe harbor per site per year. So
What happens if there was any sort of future expansion and we had to move things, these towers or something like that?
They can move them.
I know, but that's what I mean, like, where does that cost then fall?
I think it would be incumbent upon the company if they have to move it for better signal.
No, I mean,
Technology.
like, for example, if we,
Or for the city.
yeah, for the city, if we were to expand a sidewalk or a
That's why they're
street.
franchise agreements, or it must be something that has to be written up.
That'll be in the
according
code.
To address those.
Questions you probably already answered. I presume you're in search for other communities that might have taken a crack at code, and
Oh, yeah, we
Yeah,
have some
so-
we've been looking at.
have you found anything?
Yeah, we've got Salem, Oregon City, Wilsonville, McMinnville,
Okay.
We haven't looked, but Ben just,
Bend also just
and
did.
Bend also just, they sent something around just a couple of weeks ago. They permitted their first batch of actual applications and with their new code. And so that's a possibility
2
too.
weeks ago.
Our city attorney has strongly recommended that we try a very simple approach, nothing fancy or complicated. And he's also wanting us to move as quickly as we can, because we've got one company that they've accepted their franchise check, and when they actually move forward and submit for a site, if we don't have any regulations in effect at that time, which we may not, they're going to have a free rein. They can do whatever they want.
I'm just going to, one of the concerns I have is, keeping things simple is good, but usually complexity is introduced to protect
Well, sure.
rights. So, it's
Sure.
going to be a
That's why we have the
balancing act,
regulations we do, and, yeah.
But I think it's, good luck on finding more code. That's going to be the key, is that's our main protector, is how good a job we do with that code,
Yeah.
so.
And that's what we're looking for. So in the short time we have left, send us your questions, and I can send out electronically some of this paperwork that we handed out that has the links that are blue in here. That way you can just click on it. And keep on researching. It's fascinating.
I think that these should be available on the website, like the packages are, and maybe a link to the video.
Sure.
Just so
Yeah.
for-
We
so
have to
that
put a
the community can
disclosure
see
or
it.
something there.
Right,
It might be
right.
copyrighted.
Yeah.
And as questions come into you,
Yeah.
can you post them right away, so, because they may generate more
More questions.
questions, rather than kind of accumulating them all and doing a big dump?
Or maybe twice a week or something.
Yeah,
I don't need 72 emails.
well, yeah, you do.
No, I don't.
I guess I got alarm bells going off. We're talking about submitting questions, and you're going to be responding to us. This feels a little bit like deliberating
No, it's just
by
questions.
email and phone. I mean, I'm going to submit my questions to you because I think that's the right thing to do, but I don't know
Or
what
we
we're
can
worried
have them
about.
submitted and bring them to the next, the
Yeah, they
joint
wouldn't
work
have to.
Perfect,
session.
yeah.
I thought that's
They
what
would
you were
just
going to do.
research.
Yeah, and maybe we
Yeah.
can send them out ahead of time so that the counselors
As a
and
package,
planning
yeah.
commissioners have time to
That'd
absorb
be
it
great.
and look at them.
Yeah.
So we'll plan on that.
Because I think that a lot of these questions, even as we've been bringing them up, don't necessarily have to do with city code every time.
Right.
Because we're kind of expanding beyond that a little bit, because if we're going to have a work session with the council,
Right.
then a lot of these questions wouldn't necessarily have to do with city code. It'd be even further out beyond
That's
that,
true. That's true.
which I think will be very interesting, actually.
The code's our first line of defense.
Right. And then beyond that, city council.
Yeah, I think our intent was to do the same thing we've done here with the city council, kind of educate them to why we need to be doing this and that type of thing. And we may be able to take a step higher up by the time we get to them, especially with your help as well.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm gonna bring one thing up quickly because it's a quick one. That's also on our agenda that we sent out, and that is the time frame that somebody has to to appeal a land use decision made by the Planning Commission that would go on up to the City Council. Our code references in Chapter 16.89, and it's for Type 3 applications, the ones that get appealed to City Council. I guess it would apply to Type 2s as well. Our code references that somebody has 10 days to file an appeal from the date the decision is mailed. ORS changed Chapter 227 some time ago, and it's 12 days. And so we need to honor that now. We're doing that, but we need to update the code to reflect the 12 days. So that's a quick amendment that'll come through.
Do you need us to vote on that?
No.
Okay.
No, we don't have language in front of you, so we'll bring it back at the appropriate time. And then the last one is building height. In the last big batch of code amendments that was just processed and reviewed and approved in the fall of 2019, there was a change to the definition of building height, the way we measure it. That it changed from the average of the roofs,
Multiple peaks.
to the peak of a roof now. And it's 35 feet is what we have for R1, low density residential, R1.5, and R2. And the CR, the commercial residential, is 45 feet. Well, by changing the definition, we are now having problems with some of our builders that are hitting a ceiling, no pun intended, with the height. And so they can't propose a 3-story building because you can't do a 3-story building at 35 feet high. So we would like to propose moving that in the R2 zone to 45 feet high, because it's the multifamily zone, and leave the definition the way it is. Because the previous definition, which is similar to the Oregon Structural Specialty Code, is a little confusing, and we feel that measuring to the peak of the roof from the lowest grade is the cleanest way to get the height. Because other heights are based off of roof pitch. And so you might get to 45 feet or 35 feet at the midpoint of a roof, when in reality it's actually going to be higher by the time you measure to the peak. So that's a little disingenuous for somebody to understand. Well, you know, it's supposed to be 35 feet, but now it looks like it's 40 feet. So which is it? And so we've had the phone calls since within 2 weeks after the code was adopted in regard to this. And we know we have projects coming forward soon that are also grappling with this. And so we want to write up some text amendment language to bring forward to the Planning Commission as well, to review that and change the height in the R2 from 35 feet to 45 feet. And I've been researching other cities to be in concert with multifamily zones elsewhere.
I thought that it was, that we had said that we went with 35 feet specifically so that we could give a variance if we needed to, but that protected people that are like in a 1-story house next to a 3-story townhome.
That would be my chief concern also.
Yeah, that was that infill standards situation.
Right, and I think that that was why, because I remember discussing it quite a bit, that it was something that we kind of stuck to it on the 35 feet because we didn't want to, you know, throw shade over the neighbor's house excessively, and wanted to, you know, if somebody came in and said, hey, we really want to do this, and we looked at it, then we could, you know, like apartment complexes behind Fred Meyer. That's different than the 3-story townhouses next to the 1-story bungalow by the fairgrounds. You know, it's a different, it's different, and it's something that since our code.
And the other part of this is that it's not just the zone, it's what the area is planned for. Because that's what developers are going to go against. And then we'll have people that bought a house that looked like R1, but they didn't check the plan because most people would never do that. And they find out they're not an R1, then they've got a 45-foot house being built next to them instead of a 35.
And I think that that's something where we had discussed it before. And
That's why we did not change, as was proposed by a developer and we brought to you, that provision that kept the infill type arrangement with the extra buffer width.
Right, that 10-foot, 15-foot, 5-foot
And we're not thinking of changing that.
Okay, so the buffer width is still there.
Yeah, the buffer still is there.
It was the back buffer, side buffer, backyard, side yard buffer, wasn't it? That they wanted to say if it was like next
Side
to a
yard from
corner.
7 feet to 15 feet, or from 50 feet down to 7 feet. That was the discussion that went back and forth.
I think I mean, I know you guys are going to be busy with 5G stuff. constantly, but I think that having it, as we discussed before, since our code allows us to approve things with variances, I prefer to keep it the way it is and allow for, we can discuss a variance unless somebody else thinks differently.
Or leave the buffer the way it is and just
Well, the buffer's left the way it is, but
perhaps leave the truly R2 zones that are all within the R2 comprehensive plan designation to be
well,
at
except for the
45 feet.
R2 comprehensive zone designation right now has little tiny houses next door to it.
Yeah, this may be more controversial than we think again.
Yeah,
Because the issue is needed housing.
right.
And we have at least 3 residential zones, and one of them is a high-density zone. And guess what, folks? We don't allow high density in our high-density zone because we limit it to 35 feet.
Right.
That isn't right. We're prohibiting apartments anywhere in town because we have a 35-foot height limit. Now, we actually were able to achieve 3 stories in our R2, but they had to have very flat roofs.
Okay.
And that's how we've managed to do it in 2 projects now.
Can't they apply for a variance for a 40-foot roof?
The variance process really
It's very
doesn't work.
tricky because the findings that have to be made are really specific to a special circumstance or hardship on the property, typically physically, that is not allowing that person to enjoy the same rights as their neighbor in the same zone. So it's typically related to natural constraints on the property, steep slopes, the waterway. There could be a huge leach field, and so that's forcing them to encroach into their setback. And so making variance findings to recommend approval, it's really tight. And if you have a raw piece of land and a developer comes in and knows what the setbacks are, well, then that's a self-induced hardship, so we can't recommend approval that way either. And it's really a sticky situation.
Except for we're talking about heights, not setbacks.
Well, there's also opportunities for discrimination. Once you're leaving it up to the board to decide whether something is the right height or not, then you're kind of leaving it up to personal opinions as opposed to just rules.
It's an honors
Rules are better, I think.
process, too. If you recall, it's over $2,000 for a variance request. It's discretionary. It could be denied, just as you said.
Well, there could be a compromise by doing 5 feet, because then you're guaranteed they're not going to put a 4th floor on with a shallow roof.
Yeah.
So you could do it at 40 feet, because they're not going to do 4 full floors at 40 feet.
I was just going to say,
Maybe we could
my
find a
comment was
compromise.
10 feet's a big jump. So.
Yeah.
So we
I
could
guess I
bring
like-
forward some language to you with some compromising language,
Maybe some
the different
options.
parameters, some options.
Yeah.
That'll work.
What Canby, don't they have solar lots, what you would call solar lots?
That's throughout the whole state of Oregon.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's solar requirements. Yeah.
Yeah, so does that come into play in all of this as well?
I think it depends on the lot and what the
Okay, so
proposal is.
Okay, yeah. I don't know
Look
enough
at
about
that. Yeah.
the particular language to know what that would look like, but I know that when they're building homes.
You don't want to see the language, it's complicated.
Couldn't be, could it? But I mean, when they're building homes, I know that that's come into effect where they had to adjust the house a little bit because of the setback
Right.
and
We'd
the
have to
height.
look at that.
Yeah, if you look very closely, there's a couple remnants in our code still referring to solar access. And actually, it's because we forgot to delete those. We had several chapters in our code that were based upon passive solar gain rather than photovoltaic, which is what is really being used today. And so we ended up repealing those chapters because they went to requiring that twice as many homes be faced north and south on residential designs, and it became impossible for developers to take any given property and make sure that more than 2/3 of the homes had the longest side of the home facing south. It was driving us nuts. And so the Planning Commission was waiving every single subdivision application that went through, so we finally deleted the entire chapters that were really thought out and very interesting to help, promote the use of passive solar gain.
Yeah.
But that isn't what people are doing really today. That
there
is
an
technique in the
ORS?
countryside.
Is there an ORS regarding solar photovoltaics on roofs?
I'm not sure that there is any.
Like if somebody spent thousands of dollars to put them on their roof, and then somebody built a 45-foot house, apartment building next to them.
Yeah, I don't really know.
We could find out, try to find out.
Yeah, that's,
Our time is past.
The witching hour.
Pardon me?
The witching hour.
Yeah. So I thought this was a great beginning.
Yes,
And we'll be meeting again on the 18th
March 18th, joint work session.
here or upstairs?
It might be, will it be in the Willamette room that we have over here in the library? I don't know, we'll let you know, we'll find out.
it'll
I
be in
think
this
it's in that
building.
other
Because you
room
can
by
put
the
it in-
library.
Yeah, like we
Yeah.
did before.
Yeah, it's better to sit at the tables.
And then we have our next regularly scheduled meeting for the 24th.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
and currently, we don't have any applications for that meeting, so we haven't decided what we can do by Friday to have another topic for you.
Oh, for the
So-
week advance notice or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
We definitely have an item coming March 9th.
that's what we're working on now.
Yeah.
Well, as a reminder, I won't be here on the 24th.
Oh, then let's just cancel the whole thing.
No, I just,
I won't be here either.
We'll definitely.
To do.
It's possible that nobody will.
It's possible. Anything's possible.
So
Okay.
stay
so
tuned, we'll let you know for
Yeah.
for certain.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everybody for coming.
Discussion.
Good luck in here.
do we need to move to close the,
I don't think so.
okay.
We're just